Welcome to Cat's Treats. Today I'm super excited because we are doing a 100% toe-to-tip original cat recipe. This is going to be for my wildflower tart, which has a little bit of an interesting origin story because as some of you might know, I am very allergic to citrus fruit, which means unfortunately I cannot have lemons, which even more unfortunately means I cannot have lemon tarts or lemon meringue tarts. And this recipe came because one substitute that I use for lemon in a lot of recipes I cook with is a spice called sumac, which is made from the ground petals of this very pretty wildflower that grows in a lot of parts of the world. It's used in a lot of like Middle Eastern and Central Asian cooking, not so much over here in the States, but it has a very lemony flavor to it. And so that flavor as the base, combined with using some lavender and some other local wildflowers that are currently in bloom, can allow you to create this really fascinating, delicious, lemony sweet tart that is made entirely with floral ingredients. We're going to start by creating the sumac juice, which is going to be the replacement for where lemon juice would go in a traditional lemon tart recipe. This is what the sumac looks like when I buy it. It's sort of a red brick colored granular powder here. It's actually really cheap. This whole quantity here I got at my local farmer's market for less than $3. And we're not going to be using a ton of it in this recipe, just a couple of tablespoons. Now to turn these ground dried flower petals into, a workable sumac juice, I'm basically just going to pretend like it's tea. I'm going to pour about a cup of water into a pot. And for every cup of water that you use to make your sumac lemon juice, you're going to be using about 2 tablespoons of the sumac in that. I only need about half a cup for this recipe, but that's because I'm going to reduce it down because it's not quite as strong as using lemon rind or the equivalent of it. I also see that my ice cream is ready. It's not relevant to this video. I just really wanted ice cream and I got an ice cream maker. Yes. Yo, what if I did like a sumac ice cream?
Like a lemony sumac ice cream?
Yeah. Okay. Ow. I'm going to pour about a cup of water into a pot. And for every cup of water that you use to make your sumac lemon juice, you're going to be using about 2 tablespoons of the sumac in that. And then I'm going to just set that on simmering in the background while I work on putting together the tart crust. This is actually a super simple base tart crust recipe that I use for a lot of things. 2 cups of flour, 1/3 cup sugar, a little bit of vanilla, a pinch of salt, 1 egg yolk, and we're going to mix that all together and then slowly pulse in some cold butter, about 1.5 sticks of it. The only thing about this recipe that I really changed from tart to tart is an extra teaspoon of some flavoring. In this case, it is a little bit more of the sumac in place of using some extra lemon zest in a normal recipe. Sometimes I will use ground ginger, sometimes I will use cinnamon, just depends on the kind of flavor I'm going. In this case, I want to really bring out that sumac flavor in the crust as well, so it's just the extra teaspoon of sumac. I'm going to start by putting all of the dry ingredients plus the egg in the food processor. And I'm just going to pulse all of those together until they look somewhat mixed. Now, while this is mixing, I'm just going to drop in 1 cube of cold butter at a time. And it's going to look like nothing's happening and it's not coming together, but there will be a point where it goes from suddenly nothing is mixing to everything is mixing. You'll understand what I mean. Once the butter is all incorporated and it's fully mixed, I would compare the texture to a packed wet sand at the beach, if that gives you a good idea of what you're looking for. It's almost like an incredibly dry cookie dough to the touch. I am also going to be making a little bit of a mess, so I'm going to put my apron on. Flour, flour, flour. It's like I'm calling out my attack names. I'm just going to kind of knead it together with my hands like this until it becomes a singular piece that I can roll out. Doing a little roll. It's okay if it starts breaking up a little bit at the edges as you roll because you're just going to press it down again into that tart pan. You're aiming for about 1/4 inch of thickness. What a world baking is where 1/4 inch is ideal thickness. That's not going in the video. We got our tart pan. You can also totally use a normal pie pan for this recipe, and yeah. Tart pan with this little lovely removable bottom. You can actually totally use a normal pie tin for this recipe, follow all of the steps exactly the same. The only difference is going to be the shape of it due to having, you know, a pie tin shape and not a tart shape. And also this just makes it a lot easier to take out while maintaining, you know, the form of everything going on. Gonna make it a greasy boy. We're going to just transfer this crust in as much of a one piece as possible, but it's fine if it breaks. We'll just pinch it together again into this pie crust. And we're just going to gently pinch in to cover the remainder of the tin, trying to maintain, again, that 1/4 inch or so of thickness all around. Now, in a very dry crust like this, it's not so much of a factor, but I do typically recommend that you want to build your crust a little bit higher on the edges than necessarily the pan goes, or at least right up to the top of it, because there will often be a little bit of shrinkage as something cooks. And my other thing to be wary of is that when you're adding things to the side, in this little divot here in the corner between the side and the bottom, it can be very easy to unconsciously get a thick buildup in that corner. So you really want to make sure that you go through with your thumbs around the edge and everything is pinched out and up and never too thick in that corner there. You'll probably have a couple little bits of extra crust in there. That's fine. It's a little snack. And once everything is pressed in and you're satisfied, that should go and chill for a little bit, either for about an hour in the fridge or half an hour in the freezer. With the crust prep done, that should be enough time for my sumac tea to reduce to be about half a cup. And it looks like it is, so I'm just going to wait for this to chill a little bit and then start on the filling after a brief fashion break. A very simple outfit rundown for today. Just a bow from Random Accessory Shop in San Francisco. The blouse is an angelic pretty cut-sew. My socks, standard Lolita over the knees with a little bit of lace from Alice and the Pirates. My shoes, I will remember where the shoes are from and put it in the video here where I got my shoes from. And the dress is from a small Chinese brand called Souffle Song, which is a really interesting thing to bring up because it is in fact the first dress I have worn on this channel that is very beautiful but made like absolute shit. So this is the Song of Skylark jumper skirt from Souffle Song, and I have the same issue with this dress that I do with every other piece I either have owned or seen by them, in that they have a great eye for picking and putting together gorgeous prints, often from old oil paintings or public domain art. Really good eye for how to lay them out on the shape of a dress, but the quality of the fabric is terrible. It's just very crepey and crunchy, and when you look up close at the printing, a little bit blurry on the details. Lacing is just cut. There's lots of raw edges on the seams. They are finished, but they're not finished well. Souffle Song is a brand that I see often recommended to a lot of starting people getting into Lolita fashion because of its very, very low price point, but I would not recommend buying it new. If you can get it secondhand like I did this, they can have a lot of wonderful options. I just would never pay more than $40 for a dress of theirs. Having said, this is one of my favorite dresses design-wise. I'm a huge fan of it. I'm a huge fan of the fact that it looks like I have a picture of myself on my dress, and I think that that's funny. I simply am also glad that I only paid $25 for it. Obviously, the extra residue from the sumac flowers is still going to be in there, but you can just strain that out pretty easily. I'm just going to set this aside for now and start separating my egg whites from my egg yolks. I actually need 5 egg yolks for this recipe, which means I have quite a lot of egg white leftovers, but that's actually really convenient for me because I make macarons all the time, or if you don't want to do anything quite as intensive, you can use those up by making a meringue, pavlova, or egg white omelet if you just need a breakfast. I'm just going to whisk these yolks together a bit with a fork and set them to the side while I get my other filling ingredients ready. Those other ingredients that you need include 1.25 cups of water, 1/3 cup of cornstarch, 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter, a little pinch of salt, about a tablespoon of extra sumac to put in, and half a cup of lavender sugar, not pictured here. The lavender sugar is pictured here. Now, all lavender sugar is very literally granulated sugar that you've let some lavender petals sit in for a couple of days, even a couple of weeks. I would recommend a ratio of about 2 tablespoons of dried lavender per every cup of sugar, 1 tablespoon of fresh lavender for the same. What this does is simply get you a lot of sugar that is flavored very strongly of lavender. And it works so well because sugar is a desiccant, which means that it is a dry substance that draws moisture and oils away from things you put in it, just like salt does. And in much the same way that salt can be used as a preservative to dry things, sugar can as well. I really like using it with lavender in this way especially because I think that most of the lavender extracts that you can buy to put in things taste like trash. It's not nearly as good as using the actual thing. And also because there's a lot of recipes where you want to have mostly or all dry ingredients just because the ratios are very sensitive of moisture to not moisture, such as ice creams, tarts like this, or macarons. I always keep a big bowl of it like this at the ready in the pantry so I can just scoop out what I need for whatever recipe. This particular recipe calls for a cup of lavender sugar, which I'm just going to scoop out of my big bowl here and then sift into another bowl to get the bulk of the lavender petals out, because after they have had all of their oils and such stripped out of them, the remaining petals can be very, very bitter, and you don't necessarily want that little mouthfeel left in your pie. While we were gathering and measuring out those ingredients, the tart crust actually had more than enough time to chill in the fridge, so I'm going to go ahead and pop that to blind bake in the oven for a bit. When you hear someone use the term blind baking in baking, that basically means that you're just putting the crust in the oven without the filling inside it, so you're baking the crust and the filling separately. Now you can use that with a filling that needs to be baked anyway, like an apple pie filling, just by kind of cooking the crust halfway first so it remains crispy on the bottom even after you put the filling in and then finish cooking. Or you use them a lot with pies like this, where since the filling in it is going to be a custard that simply sets in the pie on its own and doesn't need to be baked, you can bake the crust all of the way first. Because the crust is being baked by itself without anything in it, normally it would puff up a little bit, which we don't want. So to prevent that, I am going to weigh the crust down while it bakes by covering it with aluminum foil and putting some pie weights into the center to keep it weighed down. Now you can buy actual pie weights for this, which are usually small ceramic beads, but you can also just use rice or beans if you have some of those lying around the house, which I do. This is going to go in the oven at 350 degrees for about 20 minutes. And while it bakes, I'm going to start cooking the filling. My boyfriend isn't here to help me film this part of the episode, so I'm just talking to myself in an empty kitchen. What if I use a kitty cat for views? Will that help? Is he entertainment? Are you entertaining, Finn? Yes, I know. I'm so entertaining. People love me. I'm going to combine all of the dry ingredients together and do a little bit of a whisk just to get them more evenly distributed. After that, all of the dry ingredients go into a saucepan along with my water and my sumac juice. And this all collectively is going to go over a medium to low heat on top of the stove. I'm going to be stirring it somewhat frequently just to make sure no sugar or anything gets super stuck to the bottom. And you're going to be waiting for the sugar to melt and for the whole mixture to look a lot more translucent than it is as of right now. It will be kind of thin and cloudy, and then gradually after about 6 to 7 minutes of this, it's going to start thickening up and bubbling, and then you can turn the heat off. I'm also going to add a little dash of vanilla because I forgot to earlier. Vanilla, by the way, also technically a flower flavor for our wildflower pie, since it comes from a kind of orchid. It's not a bean, despite the fact that people say vanilla bean. Once that mixture thickens up, and you should be able to see a pretty notable texture and color difference here, turn that heat down onto low and get ready to temper your egg yolks. I know tempering egg yolks sounds scary because tempering chocolate is scary, but all it is just pouring a little bit of that hot mixture into these egg yolks, mixing them around, making sure they're all thoroughly mixed together, and then pouring all of the egg yolks back into the pot. You do want to add the eggs back in gradually like this, just so that you make sure everything is fully incorporated at a nice texture and you don't end up with like weird cooked eggy bits throughout. This is also a good time to add food color because the filling right now is naturally sort of a medium pink tan blend. I like adding a little bit of red food coloring and black food coloring to make it a dark rose color, because a darker color pie is also going to show up our decor a bit better. I've returned it to the pan to whisk in those 2 tablespoons of soft butter. Once those are all mixed in, we are going to cook it for just a little bit more until you see large bubbles start to open up and pop. You see the bubbles popping up occasionally? That's exactly what you're looking for. When it starts doing that, take it off the heat. While we were waiting for that to happen, the crust is actually finished up. And I prefer usually with tart fillings to add the filling while the crust is still fairly hot. In my opinion, it helps the two kind of bind together a little bit more before they set. We can actually already start some of that decoration process even while it's still cooling and setting, because I went and gathered some wildflowers from my backyard and the nature trail behind our house that I'm going to use to set in on that. I'm using violets and yellow cornbeard for this because they're both what's blooming now and I know they're both edible. So please use flowers that you know are edible, because you know what else is a pretty blooming flower that you see in the wild a lot? Deadly nightshade. Don't do that. Also, I recommend not picking flowers from the side of heavily trafficked roads or anything, or from yards other than your own, both because then you have the risk of car fumes, and also the risk of you don't know what other people put on their lawns. Don't want to chance that. Just go into some proper wilderness and do some gathering like a Skyrim quest. I pinch off the stems and then just gently press them into the pie so that the petals lie down flush with the surface. There we go. I love how red wall core it ends up looking. I'm also using gold dust and a small brush to just lightly shake on some little sparkly bits. And you could totally just leave it like this. It looks super pretty just like this with all the flowers and the gold laid on top of it. But there is one little trick that I like to do to just really polish up the whole thing. And it has the bonus of helping preserve the flowers for a couple extra days if you need that too. Take an envelope of gelatin, a tablespoon of sugar, and about a cup of water. And we're going to mix that together on low heat until all of that sugar is dissolved. When the mixture turns clear and it starts smoking but not yet bubbling, you can turn off the heat and wait for it to be slightly warm to the touch. And when that's somewhat cool, I can simply pour it gently over the surface of my tart. And as that dries and sets, we'll have a pretty glossy coating for our tart. It is the next day now because I was sleepy and also didn't want to eat tart for once in my life. It's only because I had eaten a quart of homemade ice cream by myself earlier that day. Let's cut in though. Let's go.
Excellent.
Little slice.
It's a mighty slice.
Little slice of flowers.
Candy.
Cheers.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, it rolls.
It's so good. This is one of my favorite pies.
It tastes excellent. It's right in between a berry and lemon in terms of sweet and tartness.
Yeah, it is. It is so difficult to describe the flavor to people, either online or in person, just because the closest you can get is it's like a lemon curd or a lemon meringue tart, but there's so much, in a positive way, oddness to the flavor just because it uses a lot of flavorings that, at least in American desserts, we don't really use a lot of floral flavors. So it's fascinating on the palate as well as being delicious. And if you are a fan of the baking novelty, I would especially recommend it to you because otherwise you will probably never encounter this pie at Publix.
Yep, gotta do it yourself.
I was actually considering taking it to my fashion meetup tomorrow, but no, it's all for me. It's all for me this time, baby.
About time.
Roll it.
Excuse me.
Hell yeah,
Have to
dude.
get that. No,
Hell yeah.
it's not elegant.